Welcome to our schools, Peter, to our POPI Portal training.
Good morning, Michelle. Good welcome, educators. We are doing something interesting for you today. We are doing module 1 of 7, and we are going to be focusing on the governance function on the TPN POPI Portal for schools.
So we're going to take our schools through inherent risk, residual risk, the 8 conditions of lawful processing. But before we get there,
yes,
let's start off with a real-life case study on the protection of personal information.
Fantastic, Michelle.
Let's rewind to the 7th of March this year, a week or so ago, where Microsoft put out a communication that Microsoft Exchange is at risk and has been attacked worldwide, and 60% of organizations who use Microsoft Exchange locally on your server are at risk.
I am 100% certain a lot of the schools today with us are going, well, we use Microsoft Exchange and we actually share a lot of personal information over that system.
Right. So TPN in our personal information impact assessment had identified that email exchange is inherently high risk, just by the nature and the volume of information that is coming and going out of the environment. So we had already identified that Microsoft Exchange was at risk. And what Microsoft Exchange had said was this attack had been going on since January. They released a patch on the 7th, and of course we put out that patch, updated that patch immediately. So part of, because it's high risk for us, we had identified some control measures that we would put in place to limit the risk. And those control measures for us were to say, well, we always have to be on the latest set of software. You keep up to date with the latest releases. When the patches come out, you apply those patches straight away, regardless. When that communication came up from Microsoft, we took our Exchange server down immediately off the network, bring it down, and let's contain and identify what had transpired, what had happened. And I guess that's the point.
Yes.
The point is, through the personal information impact assessment, is going through your business from top to bottom.
That's it.
Every single function.
That's
How
exactly
many functions have we got, Peter?
Michelle, we do have a substantial amount of functions. We are going to go through the next couple of sessions. Like we said, there's 7 on governance, finance, human resources, information technology, which is obviously a very topical one that you just discussed, operations, legal, as well as sales and marketing. And like Michelle said, POPI compliance is not one of those things that is just done once, like your TPN POPI portal and the personal information impact assessment. It's continuous improvement on your systems as well. So this is going to show you specifically your inherent risk, where your risk actually lies at the institution, at the school, as well as how to mitigate those specific risks through policies and procedures, as well as through your action plans.
Absolutely. Thanks, Peter. So today we're going to go through governance. Within governance, there's still a number of sub-processes.
Yep.
And as we walk this journey, we're going to go through 130 different sub-processes. And for each sub-process, it's about identifying, is it inherently high risk?
Yes.
Or is that sub-process actually not? There's not a lot of risk attached to that sub-process. Because ultimately, the goal is to create an action plan. And the action plan is based on where have we got inherently high risk, but based on our lack of controls and procedures that we have at the moment, we still have high residual risk.
Yes.
And based on the 8 conditions of lawful process, we still have high behavioral risk.
Of course.
And so where we still have high inherent risk and high behavioral risk, that action plan needs to be addressed sooner rather than something where you've got low risk.
And I think it's important to say we at TPN have used almost an hour every single day to do our own personal information impact assessment. It's not even our first one that we've done. I mean, we have done it previously, but also it takes around about that sort of time to get through everything and to really take yourself through the POPI process, as well as developing your own personal information impact assessment directly through the TPN POPI portal for schools.
Peter, let's quickly talk about the dates before I hand over to you.
Yeah.
So the dates are, we need to be ready for POPI on the
1st of July.
1st of July.
That's for all regulations and for the entire Act, yes.
But actually some of those dates have been brought forward.
Correct.
Specifically Regulation 5.
That's it. Regulation 4 and Regulation 5 is the important ones. And what we've got over there is, in terms of the draft regulations, we were actually supposed to register information officers at the information regulator already on the 1st of March. But that's sort of come and gone. The new date that we've got is the 1st of May. And that also is the date that you need to have done your personal information impact assessment, as well as your information officer taking you through certain things that you need to be compliant with in terms of that regulation.
So just to be clear, we have got a final set of regulations. Yep. Those final regulations in terms of Regulation 4 and 5 have dates from which we need to be earlier ready.
Yep.
The personal information impact assessment is relating to Regulation 5, and so we need every organization needs to have an information officer, and that information officer has to have done your personal information impact assessment. What you're referring to as the date that's come and gone are draft regulations in terms of how you would go about registering your information officer at the regulator. The fact is that those are still draft, and so we expect them to be ready by the first of May. The 1st of May, right. In the meantime, every head of the organization would be the information officer until such time as a different one is appointed within the organization.
That's 100% correct, Michelle.
Perfect.
Yes.
Fantastic. So the setup for today, folks, is we're going to be handing over to Peter. He's going to take us through the training. My job is to facilitate the questions and answers, so I'll be answering the questions that you may post on the chat on the right-hand side. In order to ask your questions on the chat, please do log into your YouTube channel. Once you're logged in, you can ask the questions. My job will be to interrupt you.
You're more than welcome to today.
My job will be to interrupt you and to ask those questions. We're going to ask and answer the questions as we're going through them, because I think that's the easiest way of addressing them, and I'll facilitate that. But if there are more general questions, we're going to leave 15 minutes at the end for general questions and answers. So as you're going through, if I'm not interrupting Peter at that point in time to ask the question, it's because I'm leaving your general question to the end. If Peter and I look blurry on the screen at the moment, the way to fix that is there's a little cog on the video on the bottom right-hand corner of your video. Click on the cog, click on quality, and click on 720p.
Correct.
And that'll make us all...
Wonderful. Just one more thing, the feedback forms are also going to be available during the last 15 minutes of the Q&A. Please fill those out, not just important for our feedback, but also important just to know what you think about the session, if you'd like different sessions, because we did do certain sessions on the property portal, specifically relating to retention and destruction. Go and have a look at those videos. They're all up on YouTube for you as well, with a nice heading, so you'll be able to see exactly what those are on.
And this playlist, obviously, for our schools will be available at the end of the session. So if you've missed the session, you have load shedding, and you want to come back and re-watch the session, that's fine. On the playlist will be a POPI Portal for schools, and we'll take you through. We've had a launch, module 1 will be available, and then we'll load modules 1 through 7 for schools as we go through the playlist, and you can watch it later.
Thank you, Michelle. And just before you leave, remember to subscribe to the TPN YouTube channel, as well as ringing that notification bell, because that's going to show you whenever we're producing new training sessions specifically for the POPI Portal for schools.
Perfect, Peter, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. So let's just get stuck into the system right away. I am going to try and explain this to you in the most simple way possible, because at the end of the day, like me and Michelle discussed, POPI is quite complex, and moving from 0 to 100% in a day is not really possible. You need to go through the different functions on the system, as well as the different sub-functions, and ask those questions to yourself in the context of POPI. So what is POPI requiring of you throughout this personal information impact assessment? I'm, however, going to start on the left-hand tab, and I just want to show you exactly how to set up your own system. Remember, when you log into the TPN POPI Portal for schools for the first time, it is going to ask you basic setup questions. What type of institution you are you a private, are you a public body, how many parents or how many children do you have in the schools, what is the school's name, contact details of yourself, etc. It's going to ask you those questions. However, you can also go into the settings tab on the left-hand side. Click on that. You'll already notice that I am set up as a private or public school. My company structure is specifically on a private school. Company name, I'm just going to put TPN for now. The company size, as well as number of parents or children, is indicated over there. Now, a very important thing from the start as well is setting up the correct staff to perform the different sub-functions and to answer the questions in terms of your different sub-functions under, let's say, for example, governance, which we're doing today. Click on the staff button on the left-hand side, and it's going to open up a page that looks like this. You'll notice already that I've added myself as an associated person, so I can allocate certain jobs and certain tasks to myself through the TPN POPI Portal for schools. To add a different party, all I go and do is click on the add button over there. It's going to ask me for the person's first name, surname, job title, email, as well as contact. And then you just click save. Simple as that. The next thing that I want to show you, and this is going to come about as soon as you've finished your personal information impact assessment, is setting out and implementing your own policies and procedures for your specific institution or your school. Now, to access the TPN policies and procedures, and remember, this is not just a personal information impact assessment for your institution, it's also going to provide you with all the different policies and procedures, as well as declarations and consent documents that you require as an institution to be able to fully implement POPI through the personal information impact assessment. So you'll notice with all the policy documents, we are updating these as we go along, but it ranges all the way from acceptable usage policies, information security policies, transfer policies, quality policies, website terms and conditions, as well as all your other documents, which includes things like training registers, system access request forms, user request for access, like a bring your own device access form. So all of these request forms, as well as the policies and procedures, are already made up of this specifically. The training register, quite an interesting one, but quite topical for today, as a result of us already explaining the dates to you and when you need to appoint the information officer, and they need to perform the personal information impact assessment on the school. One of the things that they also need to do is provide awareness training to your staff to get them POPI compliant, to get them to understand exactly the type of personal information that they are busy processing, what are the requirements in terms of that processing, and specifically what they can and cannot do in terms of the Act. So that's an important one, and also very topical for those dates that we've already indicated. The last thing that I just want to show you before we get into the actual personal information impact assessment is your action plan. Now, this action plan is going to be later through the system automatically imported as a result of you indicating certain things on your personal information impact assessment while you're going through your different functions and sub-functions. But you are more than welcome to also action and add certain action plans yourself. So say, for example, you need to provide that awareness training to all your SGB or other staff. You can just click on add right over there. You can enter the title like staff training, whatever it might be. Focus area specifically is going to fall under people, the due date, task priority, the status, the percentage complete if you've already started with that process, the linked people, so I can go and type myself because I'm the only person set up on the system so far, and then the action, like staff training needs to happen. This is the type of staff training that actually needs to occur for us to be fully POPI compliant. And once again, just click the save button and it's going to create an action plan directly for you on the system. Now, moving into the nitty-gritty of POPI, as well as your personal information impact assessment directly through this POPI portal. Click on Impact Assessment and then click on Overview. This is the screen that I showed you right in the beginning when Michelle and I were discussing this. But as you'll notice, there are a lot of different functions. So we call them functions. So they're grouped in governance, finance, human resources, information technology, operations, as well as sales and marketing. And once I go into the different function, it has different sub-functions that I need to answer questions on specifically. So for today's purposes, like we said, we are going through the governance function. Click on Review All Indicators. Now, I'm just quickly going to read this through for you. I'm going to show you exactly the different sub-functions that are under the governance function on your POPI portal. You'll notice already that we've got your board of directors, should that be applicable, your EXCO, your MANCO, your school governing body, so your SGB, certifications and qualifications, one of those that we're going to go through today as well, your financial committee, remuneration committee, bursary committee, credit committee, your operational committee, as well as your parents association, which we're also going to head into today. And to access the specific questions on those sub-functions, all I go and do is click on that review button on the right-hand tab, and it's going to open up all the questions here for you. Before I head into that, I'm just going to move up to the top. We're going to answer questions first things first on your SGB or school governing body. Remember, this relates to the governance function, so everything that falls under governance, how are you governing specifically the institution? So once I click on the review button, it is going to look like this. And let's just read through this together. Remember, these questions are asked specifically in relation to POPI. So contextual questions on your inherent, your residual, as well as your behavioral risk, which I'm going to explain to you once we've completed the first sub-process. So the SGB is a statutory body of parents, educators, non-teaching staff and learners from grade 8 or higher who seek to work together to promote the well-being and effectiveness of the school community and thereby enhancing learning and teaching. The sharing of personal information within the SGB is normally low, but you may share information about who is a member regularly with interested parties. So when we're dealing with the SGB, it is specifically the personal information that is being processed as a result of this subfunction. So most probably the names, perhaps even identity numbers, perhaps even email addresses and contact information of your SGB members is going to display specifically when we're dealing with the subfunction. So general information, select the accountable person. Luckily for me, I'm the only one on the system so far. Like I said, progress status, it is planned, and I'm going to select a due date. Let's say it is going to be at the end of March this year. The volume of personal information and all these questions relating to the personal identifiable information or personal information is questions that you really need to take seriously, because these questions set specifically out your inherent risk. It deals with the volume of personal information processed, but also the different types or categories of information that you are processing as a result of your SGB subfunction. So as you'll notice almost straight away is we've got these little information tabs on the right hand side. And once you click through to those information tabs, I'm only going to do this once. I'm going to show you exactly how this works. It's going to open up a wiki for you, and it's going to explain to you what the volume of personal information is, all relative, sensitive personal information, special personal information, SGB information, as well as information on children. So the first one that I opened up is this sensitive personal information or personal information specifically. Now, once I click through on that, it is going to open up a little wiki that looks like this. So personal information is information that can identify the data subject. This can include information such as the data subject's ID numbers, bank account details, as well as tax numbers specifically. So when I go through back to my personal information impact assessment or the POPI portal, I also want to find out what special personal information is as well. I've clicked through on that wiki link. It opens it up like this, and then it explains to me special personal information is defined in terms of section 26 of POPI and includes a data subject's race, sex, pregnancy, sexual orientation, criminal history, medical histories, political persuasions. So all of those different categories are going to fall under your special personal information. Now the last one, once we go into the POPI portal, is just having a look at GDPR, something that is going to be very relevant to you as an institution as well. I've clicked through on that wiki and it opens up a page that looks like this. GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, is a legal framework that sets guidelines for the collection and processing of personal information from individuals who live in the European Union. Simple as that. So if you're processing personal information on European Union citizens or persons that reside in the European Union, then you need to select yes specifically on this question. So going back to the POPI, the Personal Information Impact Assessment or the POPI portal, let's go through these questions specifically relating to your SGB. So the volume of personal information being processed in this function. We had a case study school that ran through both the readiness assessment as well as the personal information assessment for us to be able to develop the system. So I'm going to go through specifically their answers that they gave us on the TPN POPI portal. So they said there was a low volume of personal information being processed through the SGB. Does it contain sensitive personal information? Yes, it does. Does it contain special personal information? No, in this instance it did not. Does it contain information regarding children? Yes, very possibly it could. Does it contain personal information on European citizens? And they selected no on this one. Please remember to click save as soon as you've completed the different categories, and then as a result you can obviously go out of the system. It's going to save it for you and you can carry on just where you've stopped. Michelle, do we have a question?
Peter, we do have a question, and I think it's quite important that we address it early on rather than later on. Monique is asking, how do you know if you should be using your system? We're a creche, and I guess that Monique's referring to how big does your organization need to be before it's a requirement that you need to use or have an impact assessment.
This is a question we get on almost every single training session, so relevant and so topical. any person that processes personal information in South Africa, whether that's information on a natural person data subject, so a person with an ID number or a passport number, or a juristic person, so Pty Limiteds, closed corporations, needs to be POPI compliant. So you need to perform your own personal information impact assessment as a result of the regulations. So as a creche, you still need to be POPI compliant as a result of you processing personal information.
A very small number of students, you're still processing the parents' personal information.
100%.
The only time you don't need to have a personal information assessment is where you are a private household.
That's it. So for private household, you do not need to be POPI compliant. You don't need to perform your personal information impact assessment. But for a creche, for a school, even a small school, you still need to be fully POPI compliant. As long as you process personal information, you need to do so. Okay. So these first couple of questions, once again, is going to set out your inherent risk. So what risk are you actually carrying as a result of the volume or different categories of information that you're processing? The information and where it is processed. So system where the personal information is stored. Specifically in this instance, it was stored on their servers. Is it paper or electronic? Very possibly as a result of a register being sent out with the SGB meetings that they had, it was both paper and electronic. And the level of access control, our case study said it was a medium level of access control. Remember to click save. The control measures that are already in place. So what control measures are you already putting in place or have in place to control the flow of this personal information as well as protect the personal information? So they mentioned that they've already got certain policies and procedures in place. There is a specific checklist when it comes to the information that is being processed. There is electronic as well as physical access control. And when you scan your mouse over these different sections, you'll notice that it's going to give you examples. So specifically for electronic access control, things like password, encryption, and antiviruses. For physical access control, it's alarm systems and anything that sort of keeps the premises and where the personal information is being stored safe. And they clicked save on this. And then it comes to the different important questions as well as the data usage questions. And all of these questions relate specifically to the 8 pillars of lawful processing in terms of POPI. So I'm going to run through these, through the 3 different sub-functions that we're going to do. I know it seems quite repetitive, but at the end of the day, I feel it's very important that you get the context right of POPI and how to answer these questions in a POPI relatable method. Yes, Michelle.
Kate has a good question.
Yes.
How do you define the various volumes of personal information being processed in a function?
Lovely, Michelle. So it is going to be completely relative to the institution, to the person that is performing the personal information impact assessment. So let's give 2 examples here. So let's take SGB because we're going through that now. It's got personal information on the people as part of the SGB. Whereas if you are processing personal information and looking specifically at your debtors book, so your finances and how you're managing your specific debtors, there's a lot of personal information that is being processed as a result of that subfunction. So that subfunction might be a very high volume of personal information being processed, as where your SGB consists of a couple of members, couple of people, and you've got some personal information, but not a lot like you would have in your finances subcategory, specifically dealing with your debtors. So it's all going to be relative, and it needs to be taken into context when you're dealing with the different subfunctions. Does that answer your question?
And it's comparative to your business, Peter.
Of course.
We might say that a bank processes a high number of information on their customers, and therefore I only have 10 customers, therefore mine's not. But in your business, 10 is a lot.
10 is a lot. So it's really all up to you, like Michelle said. And it needs to be taken into consideration, specifically having a look at the size of your business as well. Okay. So having a look at the 8 pillars of lawful processing and these specific questions relating to this, once again, we've got these information tabs. So if you're unsure about what the question actually means, click on that wiki and it's going to open up exactly what you need to answer to when it comes to these questions. So, is the processing of personal information taking place lawfully? And this one I just quickly want to go out of, because this one is very relatable to today and dealing with these questions. It relates to the 8 pillars of lawful processing in terms of POPI, and if you're unsure what those 8 pillars are, you click on that wiki and it's going to open up a page that looks like this to you. So the lawfulness of processing when it comes to POPI is not just about one thing. It's not just about consent or the amount of information that you're processing or the different types of information that you're processing. It's all about these 8 pillars, and they include accountability, processing limitation, purpose specification, so why are you processing the personal information, further processing limitation, so you're not using the information for further processing, information quality, so keeping the information accurate, not misleading, openness, so if a person asks whether you're collecting personal information on them, you're supposed to provide them with that information, security safeguards, having a look at IT, and then data subject participation. So consent is actually just one of these pillars of lawful processing. So moving back into those questions. Is the processing of personal information taking place lawfully? We've had a look at the 8 pillars. We know specifically that we are processing the personal information lawfully. Yes. Is the processing of personal information done in a reasonable manner so that it doesn't infringe on the data subject's privacy? They said yes. Have you applied the rule of minimality? So you're not processing more information than what is actually required. Remember, this is only about your SGB function. They marked yes. Is the collection of personal information being done for a specific and explicitly defined purpose? Yes, they need this information to be captured to be able to run their SGB. Have you obtained consent from all data subjects in this area where it is considered mandatory according to the Act? Once again, I'm going to go out of this. I'm going to show you the specific wiki. I'm going to explain to you exactly when that consent is actually required. So moving into that wiki, it opens up a page that looks like this. It says, personal information may not be processed without consent unless any one of the factual scenarios in section 11 of POPI is applicable. If any of the factual scenarios are present, consent is not needed. The factual scenarios include if it is required to conclude or perform a contract. Interestingly enough, when we delve into the different functions throughout the different modules, we're obviously going to be dealing with parent information and specifically the contracts that you sign with those parents. And as a result of that, the processing of personal information might be a requirement in terms of that agreement. The party processing the information is required to do so by law. The processing protects a legitimate interest of the consumer. The processing is necessary for the performance of a public law duty, or it is done in pursuit of the legitimate interests of the responsible party. So keeping that in mind, going back to your personal information impact assessment through the POPI portal, we selected that have you obtained consent from all the data subjects. In this instance, we did get consent to process the personal information through that initial interaction through the SGB. And remember, click Save. Do you notify the data subject as required by POPI when collecting personal information? Our case study answered yes, they do so with the SGB. Has the retention and restriction of records been formalized in this area? They marked partially. Is the personal information in this area used for another purpose? No, that information that we're processing through the SGB is not used for another purpose. Have you ensured that personal information in this area is updated on a regular basis? Yes, they do so at each and every single meeting. So we're going to say yes. Are you satisfied that the appropriate security measures are in place to ensure confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the personal information? And they marked partially. Yes, they sort of there. Not necessarily 100%, but they are sort of there. And remember to click Save. Once I've clicked the Save button, you can just scroll through this and go back to your governance function. What you'll notice immediately is even though that's taken us about 10-15 minutes to do, we've only done 5% of the governance function. So you already see this takes some time to get through and time to take through properly. But don't worry, we are here to assist. We're going to go do these trainings for every 2 weeks, but also remember you can call us in the office, normal office line, the 0861-876-000 number. Michelle's going to put that up for us now, as well as contacting the legal help desk. So we'll be able to assist you in taking you through the TPN POPI portal as well. So You already noticed that once we've finished with your school governing body, or SGB, you can have a look at what the scoring is specifically for that subfunction. And what we see over here is we've got a medium inherent risk, and the reason for that is because we're processing quite a low volume of personal information, as well as only containing sensitive personal information, not a lot of different categories of personal information. The residual risk is low as a result of the different control measures that we've already put in place. Remember those policies and procedures and checklists, etc. And then the behavioral risk is also low as a result of us answering those 8 pillars of lawful processing of personal information questions in the way that we have. So we selected yes, it is going to be taking place lawfully, or it is taking place lawfully at this point in time. All of those questions right at the end. So we can already see not a big worry when it comes to the information or the personal information that we're processing in terms of our SGB. Moving forward, we're going to choose the next one, certifications and qualifications. I think this one is quite important for all the schools and institutions, because you obviously need to do certain reporting and keep up with your certifications as well as the qualifications of certain members of your staff perhaps. So let's click on the review button again. Just reading this through quite quickly, these are any certifications and qualifications that are needed to allow your school to operate or teachers to practice. The processing of remaining certified may include sharing personal information annually or even more frequently, depending on the regulations that govern this requirement. So we can already see there is some personal information that is going to be processed as a result of the subfunction. So accountable person, myself, progress status, it is assigned, and we are choosing the same date, 31st of March. Got a lot to do on the 31st of March. So personal information being processed, volume of personal information being processed. So having a look at your certifications and qualifications. The volume of personal information being processed, our case study selected medium on this as a result of there being quite a lot of certifications and everything that they need to get through on an annual basis. Does it contain sensitive personal information? They marked yes, it does. Does it contain special personal information? Very possibly in this instance, it is going to contain special personal information. So have a look through that list. If any of that information does fall under the subfunction, make sure to select yes. As a result of this, going to change your specific inherent risk when it comes to the processing of the personal information. Michelle, yes, I can see those hands. Let's go for it.
Peter, I think that there's an important example over here for our schools. One of the checks and qualification checks that the school is doing is criminal checks for sexual offences. And as we know, that absolutely is special personal information.
100%, Michelle. And obviously, I think everybody already knows that it is a requirement to do so. Remember, the criminal checks is vitally important, but it is also considered special personal information in terms of POPI. So make sure you are selecting yes on that question. Does it contain information regarding children? With your certifications and qualifications, in this instance, it did not. Does it contain personal information on European citizens? Our case study also selected no on this one. Remember to click save. Already forgotten to click save on that one. Information processed, and where is this information being stored? Easy one for us on this one. It's contained on our server. Is it paper or electronic? Very possibly going to be paper and electronic. And the level of access control. As a result of there being more personal information being processed, our case study actually selected high when they said level of access control on this, and click save. The control measures in place, setting out specifically your residual risk. Let's have a look at these. They said with the processing of personal information in terms of their certifications and qualifications, what they had in place was already policies and procedures. They had both electronic and physical access control, as well as having specific monthly reporting on those qualifications and what needs to be handed in for those certifications to be processed. Remember to click save. And then once again, we get to these important questions. With these important questions, is the processing of personal information taking place lawfully? Yes, it is taking place lawfully. Is the processing of personal information done in a reasonable manner? Yes, it is done in a reasonable manner. Have you applied the rule of minimality, so you're not processing more personal information than is what is actually required? Our case study selected yes. Is the collection of personal information being done for a specific and explicitly defined purpose? Yes, of course it is. Have you obtained the consent of all data subjects when it comes to the processing of this personal information? And our case study selected yes on this one as well. With the data usage questions, do you notify the data subject as required by POPI when collecting personal information from them directly, as they're involved in this process and the personal information needs to be processed through some other regulatory body? They selected in this instance it's not applicable, as they were provided with the information to submit. Has the retention and restriction of records been formalized in this area? They marked partially on this one. Is the personal information in this area used for another purpose? No, it is not. Have you ensured that personal information in this area is updated on a regular basis? They selected yes. And are you satisfied that the appropriate security measures are in place to ensure confidentiality, integrity, and availability? I'm guessing we've sort of already spoken about this question. They said they've got a high level of access control when it comes to this, and they marked yes, they are satisfied in this area. And they clicked save on both of those buttons, unlike myself. And then moving back to the governance function, it is immediately going to update you on your certifications and qualifications subfunction. We've only got one more of these to get through, but it is quite an important one when it comes to the personal information that is being processed in terms of your parents' association. But what we can already see just with certifications and qualifications is we've got a medium inherent risk as a result of the volume, once again, low risk as a residual risk, and then low behavioral risk as a result of POPI sort of being implemented already in terms of these different sub-processes. Now, moving to the final one on your parents' association. This one is probably going to contain quite a lot of personal information on the specific parents that form part of this association as well. So let's have a look. The role of a parents' association in a school is to work alongside the school's principal, staff, and board of management to bridge the gap between home and school, with the aim of ensuring the best possible education for their children. So, accountable person, once again go and select, progress status assigned, and the due date, once again same date for me. Personal identifiable information and those questions relating to the volume, also once again very important. Volume of personal information being processed in the subfunction, depending on the size of the parents' association, how much information you're collecting, and once again also relative to your specific school. Our case study selected low on this one as a result of there not being a lot of information that is actually being processed. It did, however, contain sensitive personal information. It did not contain special personal information. It also didn't contain information on children, and there was no person that is a European citizen on this parents' association either. So they selected no. And remember to click save. Information that is processed and where the information is stored, once again a simple one for us on this. It is on the server. Is it paper and electronic? Once again, just like what you've got with your SGB, there might be some registers that are in paper format as well. Level of access control, they mentioned that it is medium, and they clicked save. And then the control measures in place. Once again, a very important question because it already sort of sets out your residual risk. What control measures are you already putting in place to make sure that this information is protected and safe? They mentioned that there are policies and procedures in place, as well as having electronic and physical access control. None other, just 3 of these control measures in place, and they clicked save. Once again, important questions. The first wiki is most probably going to be the one that gives you the most information. Go and have a look at that one. If you're following with me on your TPN POPI portal for schools, go and click on that. Go and have a look at that. It's perhaps not a bad idea to actually go and print it out, just to make sure that you've got those 8 pillars of lawful processing in place, and to make sure that you're continuously sort of updating yourself when it comes to this, when you're asking these questions to yourself going through the POPI portal. So is the processing of personal information taking place lawfully? Yes, it is. Is the processing of personal information done in a reasonable manner? Yes. Have you applied the rule of minimality? Yes. Is the collection of personal information being done for explicit and defined purpose? Yes, it is. And have you obtained consent from all data subjects in this area where it is considered mandatory? And they selected yes on this one as well. Remember to click save. Data usage questions. Do you notify the data subject as required by POPI when collecting personal information from them directly? In this instance, it was not applicable. Has the retention and restriction of records been formalized in this area? I'm just going to stop here for a second. We did do a full module training on the retention and destruction of records. It's a vitally important one to go through. It's part of the playlist for the property sector. However, it is very relevant towards you as well. There's also a policy and procedure as part of the policy documents that has all the information on retention periods and destruction. So how to destruct records. We actually had quite a lot of fun with the IT team in terms of this module. We actually showed you how they destruct their data themselves, as well as how long to keep the information. So there's retention periods. So an absolutely vital one to go and have a look at. So yes, it has. Is the personal information in this area used for another purpose? No, it is not. Have you ensured that personal information in this area is updated on a regular basis? Yes. And are you satisfied that the appropriate security measures are in place to ensure confidentiality, integrity, and availability of personal information? And they also selected yes on this question and marked save. Now, going back into your governance function, you can already see that we've done the school governing body, certifications and qualifications, as well as our last one on parents association. And as a result of the volume of the personal information being processed that is so low, you're going to have an medium inherent risk, a low residual risk as a result of those control measures in place. And then also the 8 pillars of lawful processing in terms of POPI, all those questions have also been answered in the way that it sort of shows that these people are thinking about how they're processing personal information. Is it being done lawfully? The minimality of data, the openness of data, and all of those processes are taken into consideration as well. Michelle, that brings us to the end of our formal session. Do you have some questions for me?
Peter, I don't have any questions for you. I think that you addressed a lot in that session. Specifically around the difference between inherent risk, residual risk, and then taking us through those 8 pillars. You did set us up nicely in areas in your business or the school where there is not necessarily high or critically high inherent risk. And as we go through the further processes, I'm sure we'll have more questions where there will be critically high risk within the business. And I know one of the sessions that is always, there's always a lot of questions, is in that retention and distraction. So we will definitely be doing that for our schools as a separate model. And of course, social media and communication from a social media perspective and direct marketing. I know those are all very interesting.
So vitally
topics.
Important.
Right.
Thank you very much, Michelle.
I've put the feedback form, so if our delegates could please click on the feedback form to provide us the feedback, and of course get your certificates of attendance as a result of that. And let's give everyone the extra 15 minutes and an early close. Peter?
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Michelle. And please remember, once again, subscribe to the TPN YouTube channel, ring that notification bell, and we're also going to be putting up the link specifically to the TPN POPI Portal system and how to purchase that system hereafter. Have a fantastic day, everybody. Enjoy.